And so, welcome back to the Writing Advice Q&A! Today, we're going to be talking about descriptions, how to make them less repetitive and more effective. But as always, before I go on anywhere, I want to let you know that the following you're about to hear is merely just my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel, instead take it as the ramblings of a silly person with a boop slowpoke on their shoulder, okay? Okay, so let's dive right in. Today's question is coming from Twitter, as a matter of fact. I was one topic short this week, so I just yelled at Twitter and someone gave me a really good question. So consider checking out my Twitter if you want to not only listen to me talk about writing advice, whatever I'm up to, silly jokes, and of course, a chance to send questions my way. I do also make it a point to reply to questions on Twitter. But anyhow, today's question is about making descriptions less repetitive. How to not repeat yourself, especially across different books and stories, and just repeating the same descriptions, describing things in the exact same way. How do I go about it? What do I think about it? Well, let's dive right in. As with anything in writing, we should first stop and ask ourselves what the purpose of this is. I believe that the purpose of description is to allow the reader to imagine things clearly in their mind. We describe what is happening in detail so that the reader can piece it together in their minds and imagine a version of this story that only they could see. Now, there are pretty much two kinds of description, and they both serve different purpose, and they both can be repeated in different ways, or they both have issues regarding repetition. The first one, and the one that I feel is the crux of this problem, to be entirely honest, is blocking. Blocking is, if you're familiar with like scripts and movies and theater, is how characters move in a scene. She walked over there. She blinked her eyes slowly. She tilted her head to one side. She narrowed her eyes. This is all just blocking. This is all just relaying almost colorless information to the reader to let them know what is happening. And some may be thinking right now, oh, it's kind of bland and a little boring. Yes, it is. But the story requires it, because otherwise the reader would just not know what is happening. I'm actually currently in my off time listening to a radio play, and while I am enjoying the performance, I am definitely missing description, and sometimes I end up having to rewind a couple seconds to better understand what happened, because without context for what is happening, such as being able to see, like in a movie, or read, like in a book, the blocking, how people are moving and the actions that they're taking, I often feel lost, and I'm just sitting there going, wait a minute, did they just pull out a gun? Now, yes, it may seem a little boring and a little bit bland, but blocking is important in writing, because it lets the reader know things. It's not as important as the second type, though. I would call them, I guess, illusory and sensory description. Description that brings in the senses and describes things to the reader in a much more in-depth way. More than saying, she ran across the room as fast as she could, like a bolt of lightning, as though being chased by a madman. It's the difference between just telling someone what happened, which is in its own way important. Again, blocking is important. I wouldn't want you to get rid of blocking. I think it would make reading way less fun if there wasn't any blocking in it. This is the kind of description that brings color to your story, that lets the reader piece things together in their own particular way. It is, if I must follow the color analogy here, it is the purple that we drop in the prose here and there, and it's also good. I don't want anyone here to get the silly idea that one is better than the other, and you should have like a balance, or you should like get rid of one in exchange of the other. They're both important. Sometimes you don't need to give the reader color. Sometimes it's better that you actually don't. Sometimes you have to give them as much as you can. The only way to know for certain is to write and then revise later on. But in the act of writing, I am certain most of you have come upon the situation in which you feel as though you're repeating yourself, as though you're describing something in a way that you have described before. Now the culprit from this is, for this, I feel is always blocking, because of how bland it is and for how straightforward and blunt it is. She walked across the room. she bent over and picked up the keys. I think, in my book, I don't count reusing the same kind of blocking across books to be repetitive. Because how else am I gonna say that? How else are you gonna say she bent over and picked up the keys, if not saying she bent over and picked up the keys? Because I feel that, in my particular book, how I feel about it is that clarity in writing is king. When the reader can see exactly what you want them to see, the writing is at its most effective. And when the reader has no reason to question and is never taken out of the story, I feel like I'm doing my job correctly. So, again, if what you want to tell the reader is that she's bending over to pick up the keys, then tell them she bent over and picked up the keys. It seems folly. It seems almost silly to think of adding color to that. So again, I personally feel that when it comes to stuff like blocking, repeating the same kind of sentence or descriptory line is completely fine across books or even within the same book. Like, I feel that this is walking very close to the idea of dialogue tags and things like said, and I'm gonna tell you this right now, he said, she said, they said, it's absolutely perfect. Because if I must give you a little bit of a side story or thing, it's invisible. It tells the reader that someone is speaking. It tags the dialogue so they know who is talking without any other fuss, without any other nonsense. It's so clean, it's spotless and beautiful. I love he said, she said, they said. Those are fantastic. Or character name said. That's so effective, especially because there are a few things I hate in this world more than on-tag dialogue, especially when there's more than two people talking. I can't believe how people are okay with publishing stories where there's more than 3 people talking or more than 2 and there are no dialogue tags. How am I supposed to know who's saying what? That's ridiculous. I can't believe people do that. But anyhow, ranting out of the way. Dialogue tags are very close to the subject at hand right now. Blocking is a very straightforward way to let the readers know that something is happening, so that they can visualize it in their mind. I think repeating those is completely fine. With the caveat that as long as you're not repeating them like literally every sentence, but I don't think anyone who is afraid that they're repeating themselves a lot would do that. Like, I feel like anyone who's watching these videos for writing advice wouldn't make that mistake. So, ignoring that point aside entirely, what about repeating, or what about when you think that you're repeating the same kind of sensory or illusory descriptions? What if you feel that you describe a kiss the exact same way every time? What happens if you feel that you describe fights the exact same way every time? And for that, I want to give you a little piece of advice. And my favorite when it comes to understanding narration. Nobody sees colors the exact same way. Nobody feels the exact same way about something. Everyone feels and experiences things differently because of their background, how they grew up, how they feel about things. So I ask you, how does your narrator describe things? Every story has a narrator. If it's a first-person story, the narrator is a very easy one. How does this character talk? How do they describe things? How would they describe a kiss? These are things that I like to do when I'm writing a first draft. I get in the mind of the narrator. Even if the story is told third-person narration, there's still a narrator. A narrator with a personality. A narrator who may be a character. Who may not be a character. Who may be a concept. Who may just be a time ghost or something silly. But is still a narrator. And someone who's talking to the reader. Someone with a history and a way of talking. How do they describe things? I was writing a story, first person, a while back, and the main character had this, you could say, obsession with, it's hard to say it in a way that's not very edgy, or edgelord-like, or in this case, edgelady-like, but she was very obsessed with death. Very obsessed with death. And her descriptions in narration, her sensory and illusory descriptions were very related to the idea of dying, describing things or situations as being down under, or describing things like the passing of time as being buried alive by minutes, stuff like that. That character described things in a very specific way. How does your narrator describe things? Because I feel that we can completely circumvent the problem and the fear that you're repeating yourself by understanding and acknowledging that this narrator describes things differently than other narrators. So they wouldn't be describing a kiss the same way, because there are different people who feel different ways about things. This reminds me a lot of a while back. I talk about this all the time, but one of my favorite things about having a character be the narrator, or being clear that the narrator is a character, is that it lets you show character bias. And I find that character bias is what makes them really charming, especially when being a narrator. Especially when, like, the narrator hates this kind of person, or hates this kind of thing, and this dislike, or this love seeps into the narration. And stuff like that really brings the story to life for me. And it should be said that, especially if you're writing, if you're in the middle of the first draft, don't worry too much about this kind of thing. And even if you think that you're repeating yourself, and even if you have, you can just fix it in revision. Like description is like the easiest thing to fix in revision, because you literally just change what you said. You don't have to like reapply character motivations or have to establish plot twist earlier. Description is the easiest thing, as so is blocking. It's like, oh, I forgot to say this character opened the door before they left. It's the easiest thing in the world. It's literally realizing as you're reading that you forgot to say something, that you forgot to let the readers know that the character reloaded their gun, or that the character walked across the room before going into the next room, or something like that. Like matters in which you as a storyteller could see what happened, but you forgot to relay all of the information to the reader. Clarity. It's literally always comes back to clarity again. Being clear to the reader. Don't worry about this right now. If you think you're repeating yourself, you probably aren't. And if you are, you can fix it later. Now, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about. Oh, I remember now. I was going to talk about adverbs and how they are very ineffective, but I'm already out of time and I'll probably talk about it on the next episode. But for now, I've gone on for way too long. I've talked way too much. I hope that I have helped with your question. And if anything, I hope that I showed you another point of view. Blocking is okay, and I can assure you that even if you think you're repeating yourself a lot, you're probably not, and even if you really are, you can fix it in revision. It's fine. And if you think that you are repeating your descriptory or sensory descriptions too much, focus on who your narrator is as a person. How would they describe their first kiss? How would they describe this character's face? Everyone sees things differently. Everyone sees colors differently. Everyone feels things differently. Okay? And again, if this is too much for you, if this is too many things to be asking, don't worry about it. Worry about it during the revision draft, okay? Get that story written first. It's all that matters. Okay? Okay. Thank you for tagging along. My name is Max, also known as MKaren, and I do these videos 3 times a week. This time for reals now. On the screen right now, there should be a few messages letting you know about my Patreon, as well as how you can buy me a cup of coffee, because writers need fuel. Now, as we're in the formal outro, I want to let you know that up here, there's a playlist with over 200 writing advice videos. That's a lot. That's a lot. You could almost watch one every 2 days for like a whole year. Up here, a button to subscribe, click on my pixel face. Down over here, a link to my Patreon where you can pledge your support and get cool perks, lots of cool perks. And over here, a link to my other channel with my best friend Kitty where we play games, watch anime, and we're, boop, really silly people. Thank you for tagging along, thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I hope to see you on the next one.